Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Hello, this is Whitney Nicely, and I have to clear off my screen first, but I want to let you know that March is Women's History Month. I don't know if you've heard this yet or not, but today is March the 5th, and I haven't made an announcement about it yet, and I feel like I am doing women investors everywhere a disservice by not talking about women investors. So, tonight, and at least once a week for the rest of the month, maybe even more than that, depending on how many I can find, I'm going to tell you about a special woman investor in my life. And the first one that I have to tell you about tonight is a lady named Martha Berry. Martha Berry has passed now, but she was absolutely amazing. Martha Berry was born in the early 1900s and maybe even late 1800s. I don't know, but like long time ago. And she was born into a wealthy family. Her dad had, I think, a cotton shipping business, and he had another business in Rome, Georgia. So she was born into this family, and as Martha was getting older, she had, I think, 2 older sisters and maybe another one, but there was a bunch of girls in the family, right? And she didn't ever get bit by the love bug, okay? So she never got married. She never had any kids, and she still lived a very fulfilling life. Because what happened, Martha Berry had this playhouse out on her daddy's farm. And she would go out there and just kind of have her own little time. And it started happening that she would go out there on Sundays and just kind of be piddling around in this little house, kind of like a playhouse on her daddy's farm. And some of the local kids would see her out there and they would just stop in. And this is like back when people went to church on Sunday and they didn't work on Sunday. So these kids started noticing this lady in this house, and she started giving them fruit. She started handing them fruit out the window. And then she would start telling them stories. And then she realized that these kids couldn't read. So she started telling them stories and teaching them to read by singing hymn songs. And Rome, Georgia it's in the mountains of North Georgia, and it's called Rome. They named it Rome because it's surrounded by 7 hills, just like Rome, Italy. All right. But up in these hills, up in these hollers, up in these valleys, there was a bunch of poor people, like a bunch of really poor folks. And so these kids started coming down and coming to Martha's church that she just started having on Sundays. And as she was having church on Sundays, she was teaching them how to read and teaching them to sing, and she was teaching them lessons. And Martha's big thing was when these kids came and when she fed them, they had dirty hands, and under their fingernails is real dirty, and it just kind of grossed her out. So she started making them wash their hands, and she started teaching them about cleanliness, and she started teaching them about thinking with their head, their heart, and their hands. Okay, Martha Berry was all about the head, the heart, and the hands, and always being ready with your hands to help somebody, and thinking with your head, but also thinking with your heart. All right. That was Martha's big thing. So these kids started coming. They started learning to read. They started learning how to sing the hymns. Thank you, Linda. And they started learning about being clean and cleanliness. And then it got to where there was 50 or 100 of these kids coming every Sunday to listen to Martha Berry tell her Bible stories and to learn to read from the Bible. And they started coming clean before they even got there. They were starting to clean up before they came to see her. And she eventually told her dad, she was like, "Hey, I got all these people coming. We got to feed them. We got to do all this stuff. I need like a real church. I need like a real place. And I'm talking like 1908, like 1911, like way back in the day here. She wasn't like an ordained pastor or a preacher, and she wasn't trying to be. She was just teaching these mountain kids how to read and write, how to sing the hymns, and how to be clean. Well, then the 1920s came through, and everything was great, and Martha Berry had hundreds of kids coming to her school in Rome, Georgia. And she had kids coming that didn't have any money because she was teaching poor kids. At first, she had to go up into the mountains and find these kids and bring them down to school, like practically beg their parents to let them go, because this is when parents needed the kids to work on the farm, and they couldn't afford, and it wasn't even kids, it was boys, they couldn't afford to send their boys off to school. All right? So it started off just being boys. But when she got them to school, she cleaned them up, she taught them some stuff, and then just by word of mouth, other boys from all over the state started to come to Martha Berry's school. And she started having men come in from the community to teach these boys how to be a tradesman, how to do different things. But then these guys wanted to be paid, and she wanted to build these churches, and she needed to buy books, and so she ran into money problems. And all these kids wanted to learn how to do this stuff, so she had to figure out how she could do some money, get some money. So she ended up going to New York and kind of hobnobbing around with a bunch of socialites in New York. And she'd stay in these really dinky places and not pay for anything extravagant so that she could get every penny she could to take back to her school in Georgia. So as she's raising this money in New York and taking all of her money back to Georgia so that she could have these kids go to school, and she had them in uniforms and she had them working and she had all this great stuff going on, she ended up, I don't remember exactly if her dad gave her part of the farm or if she bought part of the farm. Jennifer, tell me. She started off and she had a little chunk of her daddy's farm, and she built a little building, and then she built a little dormitory, and she was using all this money that she was getting from New York, taking it back to Georgia and teaching these kids how to, get better in life, how to do better in life than what their parents could teach them. So she's getting all this money, and she's hobnobbing with all these fancy folks up in New York, and, it started with a plot from her dad. Thanks, Leslie. And she's got this money coming in, but she still never has enough. Like, she never has enough. She never has enough money. And then she starts meeting some real fancy people, like Henry Ford and his wife, the Roosevelts, some of the other, not exactly the Vanderbilts, but some pretty well-known people started hanging out with Martha Berry. She started getting invited to their dinner parties, and they wouldn't always give her money, but they would give her a chance to stand up at the dinner party and say, I've got this school, it's in Georgia, y'all got all this money, we need a new whatever. And she'd raise money and then go back home and give the money to her kids. Or not give it to her kids, but invest it in the school, and invest it in the school, and invest it in the school. Right? So this went on for, 10 or 15 years. She goes to New York, she gets money, she goes back to Georgia, she reinvests in the school, and then she started having these parties where the New York women would come down to Georgia and see what Martha actually had going on. And it would be so cool because all the kids, all the boys that she had at the school this time, she'd go up in the mountains and she'd find trees and she'd find shrubs and she'd find flowers, and she'd say, all right, get these and go plant them over in front of that building. Go plant them along this road. Take this. And she would actually have these boys move full-grown trees. All right, so that when her visitors came to see Berry campus, it would be gorgeous. right? So as she's doing all this, she hired one guy, and he was teaching with her, and he was teaching the boys how to do the trades and this and that and the other. And then he started kind of transitioning, and he took on a different job for her. And what he started to do was, as the end of the 20s, 1920s, started happening, and then the early 30s happened, Martha, yes, Theodore Roosevelt, him and his wife, and I think his cousin, but not Franklin, another Roosevelt, right? I don't remember. But all these big fancy folks were giving money and hanging out at Barry's school. But this one gentleman who had been a teacher, been a professor with Martha, Woodrow Wilson's wife, I mean, like, big name guys and their wives. Really, it was their wives, because let's be honest, these women are running the show. All right. But all these guys and their wives were donating money. And along this time, Martha had people in the community that would come up to her and say, hey, we inherited this farm, we inherited that farm, we've got this, we've got that, do you want it? And so then she'd have to take a trip or a fundraising adventure, or she'd call on her rich girlfriends, and she'd say, hey y'all, I need to buy this farm, I need to buy that farm, I need to do this, I need to do that. And she'd raise a bunch of money and buy the farms next door. And then the Depression hit. The Depression happened in the early 30s. And Martha had been in this cycle of raising private money and raising private money and raising private money for, I mean, decades. Decades. She'd been used to going and doing, and I mean, she even traveled to Europe and ended up raising money for her kids while she was over there. It was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. Her doctors prescribed her a trip to Europe to relax, and she ended up still raising money for her kids while she was over there. She rented it was back when women had to wear a cape over their dress. She rented a cape instead of buying it because she didn't need it but for one night while she was at this fancy party. Okay? So, anyway, during the Depression, people in Rome started dumping their farms left and right. And she had been collecting land and collecting land and collecting land for years already. She already had probably 10 or 15,000 acres. And then during the Depression, this guy that had been teaching with her, professing with her, teaching the boys trades, teaching the boys how to be men. And I think by this time they actually had girls at the school too. But he started becoming kind of like a land buyer for her. So when he found out that so-and-so was getting ready to lose their farm, he would go out and make a deal with her. Make a deal with the family. And then bring it back to Martha. And then let her know. And then all these families just started passing their farms off to Martha Berry. To the point where by the end of the 30s, I think it was by the end of the 30s, maybe by the early 40s. I get a little squished up on my dates. But by the end of the 30s or 40s, Martha Berry had the largest land campus in the world for her little school in Rome, Georgia. I think all total, I mean, she had mountains people had sold her, given her, donated to her, whatever, probably owner financed some of those things to her. But by the end of the 30s, early 40s, I think she had something like 60,000 acres. And Berry College is still around today. They don't still have 60,000 acres. They've sold off some of their land. But this is a woman who is a professional private money person. She had raising private money down to a science. And she also did that while she self-proclaimed that she was raising hundreds of thousands of kids because she was active in her school every day. She was active in knowing what was going on. She had people helping her. She had lots of things. She was growing this great organization But she was involved in it every day. She had her thumb on the pulse of what was going on at that school. Nothing got past her. But she was a real estate investor. Because you can say whatever you want to. You can be as proud as you want to be for your school, your alma mater, wherever you went to college. And your school, no matter how amazing it was and how big it was, I'll tell you right now, Berry College in Little Rome, Georgia, has still to this day, like today, March 5th, 2018, Berry College is the largest land campus in the world. Y'all know I'm a Vol girl. I love my Vols. But as big as that campus is, as many satellite operations as they do not have as much land as Berry College. And when that woman started Berry College, it was just Berry School. It was just Martha Berry School. And she was just teaching country kids how to read and write and wash their hands and to think with their head, their heart, and their hands. That's all it started out being. And it ended up being the largest land campus in the world. And I love Martha Berry. I love the story of Martha Berry. I love the tenacity of Martha Berry. I love everything about her. She was a kick-ass woman. And you've heard, Woodrow Wilson's wife hung out with her. Henry Ford's wife hung out with her. Theodore Roosevelt came by lots of different times. There's a picture of Theodore Roosevelt and Martha Berry up on the wall in the mall in Rome, Georgia. All sorts of really, really cool people helped make Berry College what it is. And I bet most of you have never heard of Martha Berry. She was, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest real estate investor to ever come out of Georgia, because her college had more land than anybody else in Georgia, any other school in the world. And she was in charge of that school. Let me tell you another story about Martha Berry. Okay, so she was hanging out with Henry Ford and probably had some dinner party or something. Actually, no, she went to meet with him. She had a meeting set up with him, and she went and she pled her case that the kids needed school books, or they needed clothes, or they needed this and that and the other, whatever. And Henry Ford was a tightwad. And he didn't want to give her any money because people were always coming to him saying, we need this, donate here, donate there, blah, 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 be charitable, blah, 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 blah. And he just didn't give away any money. So at the end of their meeting, he kind of chuckled at her and he flipped her a dime and said, here, see what you can do with this. And he gave her a dime. And she took that dime and she went back to Rome. She went down to Broad Street or somewhere, and she took that dime to a feed and seed store. And she bought all the corn kernels or seeds or I don't know what. But she bought as many seeds as she could. And she took whatever she got back to the boys at Berry, and she said, I've got these seeds, plant them. So the boys planted the seeds and harvested the crops, and then they sold all the crops. They ate, some of it, because Berry is a working farm. It's still a working college. You can go there on a work scholarship. I think they even require all the kids, even if you're not on a work scholarship, to work the fields, basically. But she took the seeds back to the boys. They planted it. They worked the farm, they harvested it, they sold what they could, they made money, and Martha Berry took all the money the boys made from selling those crops, and she got it in a big old bag, and she took it back to Henry Ford and plopped it down on his desk and said, all right, you gave me one dime, and I brought you back a big old bag, a big old sack full of dimes. She got it all cashed in dimes, took it all back and plopped it down on his desk and said, this is what I can do with one dime. Imagine what I could do if you gave me more money. And Henry thought, holy crap, who is this chick? Right? And he said, all right, we got to go see what's going on down here at Berry College. So he went to Berry College and his wife was already in. Like, she already loved Martha Berry and her spunk and all this other stuff. Like, Henry Ford's wife was on board with whatever Martha Berry wanted, and she was ready to hand her money and all this stuff. She was pulling. She was on her team, right? So Henry Ford, I don't know his wife's name. Jennifer, what's Henry Ford's wife's name? But they show up on campus, and Martha's got the whole place decorated like she always does when company's coming. And as they're driving around, the boys are out in the field, and they're working the field with, you know, donkeys or cows or whatever they had. And the next week or so, Henry sent a tractor. So they got a Ford tractor so that they could have some machinery on their farms, right? Another thing, I think it was that visit, Martha and Henry Ford are talking, and she's asking for money, because she's just, I need money, I need money, I need money, I need money. And Henry says, I'm not going to give you any money, but what I will do is, Clara Ford, thank you. What I will do is, I've got a spare, like brick maker, like an oven to make bricks in, and like a brick plant. I'm thinking like a concrete plant, but it was a brick plant. He said, if you'll teach your boys how to make bricks, I'll send the machinery you need to make bricks, and you can build more buildings. I'm not going to give you the money for the buildings, but I'll give you what you need so you can teach the boys how to build these buildings. And so now on campus, there's like 4 Ford buildings or something. And I think also when Henry sent that first tractor, I think Clara Ford, his wife, said, why don't you send 2? And then, so Clara absolutely loved Martha Berry. And so anytime Henry Ford was donated anything to Berry College, Clara would be in there saying, why don't you send another? Why don't you do another? Why don't you get a bigger one? Go ahead, send them something else too. So Martha Berry is absolutely one of my heroes, because she fought for what she wanted. She got everything she wanted. She was a very classy lady about it. She was not loud and boisterous and forceful. She taught how to improve your life through your head, your heart, and your hands. And she fought every single day to raise money for the kids of Berry College. And she was a real estate investor. And y'all know how I feel about real estate investors. She was absolutely amazing. She built the largest land campus in the world. It's still to this day the largest land campus in the world. And she mastered private money. She absolutely mastered talking to people in a way that made them want to give her more money. To give more money than she was even asking. To where money just started flooding in, because a lot of these students wanted to go to school and their parents wanted them to go to school, but there was one little boy who showed up with a pig. All his parents could afford was to send him with a pig. And then he'd have another sibling come up the next year, and they wanted to go to Berry School too, but all they had was a chicken. And Martha would take them all in. If you had money or you had livestock, whatever, come on in. And in Georgia, there's lots of judges and senators and congressmen and lots of really cool people all the way through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, like old school people who came from nothing and went to Berry College and ended up having amazing lives and stories to tell. All because one woman in the mountains of Rome, Georgia, started teaching Bible school and teaching kids how to wash their hands on Sunday mornings. And she fought for them every day. And she had rich friends who wanted to help, and they gave their funds. Some of them gave them some time and some other different things, but private money is a very important part of real estate investing. Private money always helps. You've got rich friends, and even if you don't think you have rich friends, once you start telling people you're a real estate investor, people with money start to say, hey, I got 50,000. I got 100,000 in a retirement plan. I got this and that and the other in a self-directed IRA or this and that or whatever. And you will have people who want you to invest their money. But you need to know how you're supposed to invest that money. And in a couple weeks here, April 5th, 6th, and 7th, I'm teaching a workshop on private money and how to properly get that private money funded and in the right accounts for your deals. It's very important. It's not like it was in the old days where you could just like take money from somebody. You got to document that these days. You can be the biggest, baddest real estate investor that you want to be, but at some point, you're going to need some private money. So I'm having an event, and if you want to know more about it, send me a message. I do want to say, Jennifer has popped in here to remind me that a couple years ago, was it 2012, 2013, two eagles, man and wife eagle, if you will, decided that they were going to make Berry College home. And they plopped down a nest. And every year they have baby eagles at Berry College. Last March, we had a W3 event at Berry College, and the eagles had hatched, and we could watch them on the webcam, but we could also drive down to where the eagles are and see them there. So Berry College is super cool. Also, Chick-fil-A owns part of Berry College, and they have marriage workshops at WinShape. So if you're ever near Rome, Georgia, you have got to go to Berry College. And if you like a good read and you like strong women who are also real estate investors, while you're at Berry College, pick up a copy of Miracle in the Mountains. It's all about Martha Berry and her life, her story, her history. And it's one of my favorite books. I talk about it on podcasts all the time. While you're there, Sweet Home Alabama, y'all remember the Reese Witherspoon movie? Part of Sweet Home Alabama was filmed in Martha Berry's parents' house. Really cool. Another thing about that house, so imagine an old farmhouse, two-story farmhouse. And when you walk in, there's the steps that go upstairs, and there's always a banister. You know, you got to hold something as you go up those steps. So at the end of the banister, there's usually a ball right there. And I learned that that ball is usually wooden. But once the family that owns the farm gets the farm paid off, they take that wooden ball, they cut it off, they burn it, they get the ashes, they put the ashes on the post, and then they put a crystal ball on top of it. But remember, Martha Berry's dad was rich. So there are not any ashes under the crystal ball at the end of his banister. It's a crystal ball with no ashes because he just paid cash for the farm. Martha Berry is super cool. Look her up, check her out. She was a real estate investor. She was a professional private money gatherer. She had a head, a heart, and a hand out to help anybody and everybody who needed her. She's one of my heroes. Y'all check her out. The book is Miracle in the Mountains. And if you're interested in coming to my event in April on private money, gathering private money and properly allocating it, send me a message. But Martha Berry is awesome. Berry College is beautiful. It's one of the prettiest places on earth. I think God absolutely designed it just perfectly. And check it all out. I'll be back. I'm going to tell you about Big Alma next because I also love Big Alma. And she was in San Francisco, so different coast, but I'll tell you all about her probably next week. And if you have any questions, y'all let me know. I'm here to help. But check out Martha Berry, and good luck finding her in a history book. She made some serious history, and March is Women's History Month. So I'm bringing you some hard hitters in the women real estate investing world for Women's History Month. Martha Berry, #1. I'll see y'all later.